This is a video response to Ron Edwards, Adept Press, Adept Play, and the author of the game that the RPG Learning Group is currently playing to learn, Circle of Hands. Last week, Ron took the time to amusingly, in the spirit of fellowship, vent to us. About what? Frustration that the very cool, the polished gem of Circle of Hands, a specific aspect of it, was basically Sir not appearing in this play session. What am I talking about? I'm talking about killing. There has been a marked lack of killing, and that's worth talking about. Now, Ron has speculated from his perspective as someone who's doesn't know us personally and is watching in the small little Hangouts screen watching us play his game. He's speculated as to what might be going on and some of the reasons why we might not be bringing this particular part of the game as much into the limelight as we are others. And we may have contributed to any misperception of what's really going on by virtue of having both public and private reflections on our experience. And so this video is sort of a way to bring all of those things together. All right. Combat is what things are usually called in a game, and one of our players, Eloy, has talked about this sometimes in his reflections. He's talked about his preference for sanitized violence, the sort of 1950s style shootout in a Western where there's no holes in clothing, no blood, people just go ugh, and fall over, and the hero always manages to get hit in the arm and that sort of thing. He's mentioned a preference for that kind of sanitized violence. And we have mentioned in several reflections that part of our session 0 involved not delving into gore for gore's sake, connected with that sense of certain types of portrayal of violence. And we've put certain things behind hard lines, such as acts of violence against children, as we're not interested in that kind of aspect, which might be a real aspect of the sort of setting in which Circle of Hands takes place. We understand that terrible things are happening in the background in the Crescent Lands and beyond. And there are some things that are going to be visible in our background, in our Crescent Lands with our circle. And there's some things that aren't. And I think it's very easy to listen to those statements and be left out of the actual session 0 and the interpersonal kind of day-to-day communication between the players, and infer, as Ron suggests might be the case, the possibility that we are averse to conflict, and that's bleeding through into conflict not happening in the game. So there are a lot of things raised in the video, such as the very helpful verbal summary and compression of the killing mechanics, and things like named and unnamed characters and groups and ranged combat and all the things that we've mentioned in passing or specifically since our experiment has started. So first, I'd like to thank Ron for taking the time to do that. That is yet another way for us to, reach another plateau of confidence. We've all read the rules a number of times and have an understanding here. And sometimes that manifests in play as confidence, and sometimes it manifests in play as uncertainty. And sometimes we've understood it differently and have felt the need to say, well, I think it's, and then the other person says, well, I was pretty sure it was. And then now doubt is the fourth member of the table, and we have to go into the text and check, and et cetera, et cetera. And that always has an effect on play. I'm a big proponent of checking the text in play, but it does lend that sense of, I don't know, and now I have to find an answer. And of course, that contributes to the sense of being conflict adverse. If we're not seeing the killing, if we're not seeing the fighting, maybe that's because they're not really sure about how to use the system, and so are kind of making decisions to bypass killing so that they don't have to go into the text and check it. So there's a lot of things contributing to the perception that we're playing a very pacifistic version of Circle of Hands. So this is an illusion that I would like to dispel. So let's go back to the beginning. In session 0, we laid out some ground rules, and nowhere in these ground rules was there a prohibition or a sense of restriction or a sense of shying away from violence. There were some caveats laid down about certain types of description. As I mentioned earlier, gore for gore's sake. But each of us has, as one of our motivators, or one of the things that's attracting us to the game, each of us has the combat system, the killing chapter, as one of those drives. And among the three of us, the person who's talked the most about using the killing chapter, the person who put together the initiative tracker, the visual initiative tracker that we use, and the combat cheat sheet and all of these things, the person who's done all of that has been Eloy. So while it may seem on the surface that the one of the three of us who is least interested in combat might be him, it turns out to actually be the opposite. So we've got Ivan on one end, who's interested in using the combat mechanics because he's interested in how systems work and thinks that this is a really cool thing. And won't it be cool when we get to really take this out for a spin? We've got me in the middle, who really enjoys conflict of varying types, not just violence in games, and thinks that this is a great way to express it. And then we've got Eloy, who really, really wants to see it, particularly in a one-to-one duel. What's it going to be like, in this life or death struggle against someone that you actually have a reason to fight? So, is there any actual aversion to using the killing chapter? Well, no. But the question still remains. We've had 3 full ventures, and there hasn't been a lot of killing. There has been violence, and there has been a lot of force. And the distinction, or the understanding of violence as one aspect of force, I think is important. And I think it's important if a game like Circle of Hands is going to be more than this momentary urge to kill things, and this momentary urge to express frustration or disappointment or horror at what our world can actually be and the things that we do to each other in it. So, if we are not adverse to conflict, to friction, to difficult situations that may boil over into something like violence, and yet it looks like we are, the contention I put forward is that's an illusion. So what would cause 3 full ventures to go in directions that avoid a lot of conflict? I think in many games we become fearful of losing a character. There are games which are kind of like gambling, where how far can we go before we've overextended? And there are different cultures of play where that is a major aspect of thing. And there's different systems which basically reward you through the feedback of using the system, where it's fun to to press your luck in that sense. But the risk of that experience is the loss of character, which in many games winds up with at least a period of time in the session where the character cannot play. Or not the character cannot play, the person cannot play, the player cannot play because the character has been killed, has been removed. Circle of Hands is very clever in that, and this is a piece of it that I didn't talk about enough during my overview of the system way back when we first started talking about it. But when the Circle Knights fall, killed, they rise as wraiths, meaning there is no risk of lost playtime. There is a huge risk of losing the character, but that doesn't exclude the player from participation in the venture. So that particular fear has been removed, has been obviated. So again, this is not something which is informing our seeming hesitation for conflict. And in fact, there really has been no hesitation or shying away from conflict. There's just been a limitation or a rarity of physical violence. In the first session, had I done my job properly, had I run the fight at the end, which was the only physical fight in the thing, if I had run it properly, the 2 Circle Knights would have died. There's really very little doubt in my mind that that's what would have happened had I used the mechanics correctly. But in terms of outcome, the characters are not going to be wiped out of the venture. The characters will remain, albeit in wraithly form. And the outcome of the Yuggoth being destroyed and an Amborian zone being put in its place brings us to an outcome which is pretty similar to what would have happened if the characters had been killed, turned into wraiths, and proven unable to defeat the Yuggoth. The Yuggoth is an Urbaja zone, embodies an Urbaja zone. So if the Yuggoth remains, then we have an untenable magical situation versus what actually happened in play, which is an untenable magical situation. So the outcomes turned out to be the same. So the outcomes haven't, the lack of conflict or combat perhaps hasn't actually changed how play turned out. Why no conflict? Well, here's my idea. Sadly, as you can see from the notation above, a bland visual reference, if brevity was ever going to be involved in this video, it got on the bus and left. To explain myself, I really want to use some kind of visual representation for maximum clarity, and I hope that I'm not working against myself, and I know that I'm not as talented at putting together visual references as Ron is about the play state or things that are going on in a particular situation, but I'm going to give it a go. And so just remember this white page, because we're going to come back to it later, this very bland visual reference. But for now, let's move on to the next step. Okay, so I know what you're saying. It's a box. And that's true. It is. It's a gray, opaque box image designed to look three-dimensional. Now, it could have been any shape, except it can't be any shape because I have access to this shape. So for my purposes, I'm going to have to use a box, but what I want to use a three-dimensional shape for is to represent that you can go in any direction, that this is a fully realized space around you. You are inside this space, and you can travel in any direction. However, from the direction of being inside the space, from being inside the box, you can only travel inside the box. You cannot leave it. The walls are distinct and definite boundaries. Now, what makes this particular space unusual is that you can enter it freely from the outside. Once inside, you cannot leave unless you destroy the box. Or your intention was never to be in the box in the first place. Your intention was to be outside the box, but be able to pass freely through it. So in other words, this box is a prison for those who choose to be imprisoned within it. Once placed inside it, it is a boundary, a box, a prison, a cell, a shelter, a cave, a framework, a foundation. I don't want to use purely positive words. I don't want to use purely negative words. What I want to communicate is that for those who want to be in it, it is a place that contains them. For those who have chosen not to be in it or haven't realized that they have the option to reside within it, it is simply a space that they can pass through. So now we're looking at this blue box, and this blue box represents a different cognitive space, a different area that can be occupied during play. And likewise, this one is containment for those who choose to be in it, but just an area for those who choose to be outside it. And of course, as you long ago figured out before I could eventually bring the narration around to talk about it, the gray box is inside the blue box. So in old lingo, and I don't know if Ron, if you stick to this lingo or not, or if other people who are using the Adept Play site like this lingo or not, because we can always get messed up by terms. But what we're talking about, in a sense, is the actor stance and the author stance. Now, I see the actor stance as existing inside the author stance. And you've mentioned that we freely move between the different stances in play, and I think this is totally true, but I think this is also dependent on where we intend to stand when we move. Because if our intention is to reside within the type of decision-making that comprises the actor stance, then the boundaries of that stance are a wall. We can't enter into the author stance, and we might not even want to. Now, we might accidentally drift there, but to us that seems like going out of character. It doesn't seem like shifting to a different perspective to allow for a different function of play. It's ceasing in-character play and exchanging it for out-of-character play. So I like to talk about these things as the intention to be in character or not, in character or out of character. And there are different ways to express it. So we've got the in character as the character. That's our gray box. And then we've got in character as author. We're invested in discovering things from the point of view of our characters. But we can either experience them as the character, be in the gray box, or we can experience them as the author, meaning sometimes we are in the gray box and sometimes we're in the blue box as needed, as desired. But I hope what this makes clear is that if we come to play with the intention of being in character as character, we're going to reside within that gray box. And if we come to play with the intention, express or not, understood or not, maybe it's just a feeling of authoring in this context, then we're going to be residing within the blue box, which contains the gray box. Now, I had mentioned the white space before, and that is, of course, the stances outside, such as the director stance. And if we go out even farther, we get into purely out of character, where I'm communicating as me to you, as you, like Anthony to Ron about pizza, or pass the dice, or what was the name of that guy, or whatever, or hey, what game do you want to play? And beyond that is just real world living, where we're not even playing, we're driving to work, or we're pouring a glass of cola, or whatever. So This is my bland visual reference to try and explain or try to get to the point of why was there no or very, very little violent conflict in our play of Circle of Hands so far. Maybe it's belaboring the point, and I'm sorry if it's taking so long to get to it, but I really want to be clear and interact, and I want to open up as much of our experience as possible so that we can benefit from each other's experience and perspective and, get our logic working together to understand each other. So why, I say it again, was there so little violent conflict in our play? Okay, so after that very long, drawn out, painfully obvious, maybe painful explanation with the blue box and the gray box and the white box and all this stuff, of course, you're just waiting for me to say the reason why there was very little, and I'm going to stick to the fact there's very little conflict and very, very little physical conflict in these three ventures is because we were playing in character. So I think that needs to be defended. So how can I do that? Well, we could talk all about in-character play and out-of-character play, but let's just push that off to the side. Let's talk about the characters. But before we can do that, we need to talk about force. Violence, physical violence, is one aspect of force. And in the Iron Age that has been presented to us, or that we have used the text to inspire and used our own influences and inferences to shape, force is a principal part of life in not only this fictional Circle of Hands universe, but in real life as well. And if we look at everything that our characters have done, it is very evident that these characters are being portrayed as forceful. Now we have extremes. We have the very nicest of them, Black Hadrick, amusingly. We have the most aggressive of them on the other side. We've got Kai Ernst. And we have the others somewhere in between. We have active Kai Ernst. We have not exactly passive, but we have pensive or cautious, or right? We have all these different traits through the different characterizations that have manifested or have yet to manifest. In character, all of these people have built in as a core assumption that might makes right, and that at any moment, violence might be used by someone as a tool to get what they want or to establish that this is right. Right? You have been defeated because I am the one who's fit to say so, fit to say that this is right. That's our understanding of what the Crescent Land is like, that violence is common, but we don't get from it that life is cheap. And more importantly, we get from it that the circle is a force for change. A force for change. The circle has participated in something unheard of. It has contributed to making Rolke safe in some way that has occurred off screen and we don't even really need to talk about. And they have seen perhaps common ground with the young chieftain, the young king in Rolke, who wants things to be different and who countenances, who accepts, who tacitly supports the actions of the circle, which is to say that status, which has been a bedrock upon which all life has been based, is now false. It has been broken. Peasant and gentry serve together, talk together. They are no longer worlds apart and can never join. They are the circle. Black magic and white magic, forever separated as opposites, have now joined together and become gray. Every aspect of what the circle is saying change. It's an active force, as has been mentioned to us, as in the sense of activism. This is an active force for changing the crescent line, meaning that none of these characters has to resort to the old habits, the old ways, the old perspectives. They might, but they've also learned to see another way. The peasant is a person. The gentry is a person. All points in between, they are people. They're not property. They're not patron. So, not resorting to violence as a first act is a part of our conception of playing these characters in character as character. Has violence been absent? No. In the first venture, there was a suggestion, hey, let's investigate and find out which members of the community are in the cult so that we can bring them to justice and then deal with whatever it is that they have raised. This was countered by, no, let's just go kill the thing that they are dealing with, the Yuggoth. It was that suggestion which was taken. The knights go face it. And if I had done my job properly, if I had properly internalized the killing mechanics, then those two knights would have died. But physical conflict happened regardless, and we enjoyed it. We enjoyed the tension of it. We enjoyed the visceral nature of it. And while I found it frustrating to not have it like I thought I did, I really enjoyed what the players did. So in all aspects except that kind of ego-based one, it was fun. Now I understand the point of view of the game designer being frustrated that the mechanics, when they appear, get butchered. And I understand the frustration of the game designer that when the mechanics, they're about to appear, the game session gets cut off. And I understand the frustration of the game designer that when the mechanics appear finally in the third session, they are again primarily handled through the vehicle of magic rather than melee and that sort of thing, and that we seem to be willing to run away or willing to redirect. Or in the portrayal of NPCs, we don't bring things to a head of violence. But again, let's go back and look at this from the in-character perspective. In the first venture, if I were playing from the perspective of being inside the blue box, and so I can't see the gray box at all. The gray box is just the blue box. I can move into the in-character perspective, or I can sit out from a more authorial perspective and talk about character rather than talk in character. I've got all of that mobility, right? That's everything that that one stance encompasses, let's say, two stances. The gray box is invisible to me. In that case, as the game master playing Ermentrude, I think it would be my duty to try to kill Hadric. I've got him in my power. Nothing has really happened in this story. We haven't really seen the knights be knights. We haven't seen the movers and shakers tied to the components do anything except talk. What kind of Iron Age is this? We haven't met anybody else. There are no. It almost feels like this entire village is empty. The unnamed characters are also invisible and intangible. We need to do something. And a great thing for Ermentrude to have done from that perspective, I think, would have been, because she's an herbalist and because he's staying with her and because he's trying to win her favor and because she sees him as not a threat, not of interest, not of any particular use. She doesn't believe that he's going to teach her his abilities. She doesn't believe he's going to work for her or be a representative for her. He's failed his charm role. The connection between them is not good. And while he's slowly ingratiating himself toward useful from useless, from an authorial standpoint, it would be far more interesting if she were to use her herbal knowledge when she feeds him to poison him and get him out of the way. He's a potential threat. But in character, she's not there as something that an author has to evaluate and assess on the fly. She's there as a character. She's there as a person in a real place, in a real time, in a real situation. And I know you understand what I'm talking about. And Ivan has actually found a reference, an exact description of what I'm talking about in Sorcerer recently, as he's been going through reading it. And it's in the description of how to portray NPCs. Just play them. And that's what I'm doing with Ermentrude. So I'm not treating her as someone who is cunning and rooted in fear. So I need to, remove this potential threat, which is interesting from a story perspective. It's interesting from the author's perspective. And if that were her character, that would be what I need to do from the in-character perspective. But her character was based in jealousy. So if anything, she wants to keep him around to witness her triumph so she can get from him the satisfaction of being his better. So from the in-character perspective of the character that was created before any of the play started and was, put into the setting to just be played, she's not going to bring any violence. The smith, he's not there to be adversarial. The elder, he's just trying to seem wise. There wasn't really anybody there to fight other than the Yuggoth. And they fought the Yuggoth. So conflict, physical conflict, happened in context naturally. This wasn't handled very well. In the second venture, they were heading right for conflict. We would have seen physical violence. It would have been ugly. People would have died, of course. But we had to cut the time off. So I'm going to say that it both did and did not exist. But once again, it existed in context. We have the peasant, right? Ingolf, marching alone up to deal with the gentry, to put it on them. What are you going to do about this? And they're like, nothing. What are you going to do about it, Circle Knight? And it felt to observers, not just you, Ron, it felt to other people like he shied away from conflict. In this culture, he could challenge the man to a duel. He could, throw down with them. But Ingolf was still a peasant, and he was biding his time. Dying in the keep or killing the commander doesn't feed anyone. And if a peasant is responsible for anything in the society, it's making sure people are fed. And that's the perspective that he's operating from. Otto, on the other hand, was driven to the point where he was going to tear the place down brick by brick, and he had the means to do so by virtue of his gift to transform into a silver dragon. And it's unfortunate we didn't get to see that. And we all wanted to see it, but we just ran out of time. From an artistic appreciation thing, I had enough at the point where we declared the ending. Still would have been fun to play. In the third venture, we've got Kai Ernst, our most aggressive character, walking into someone's home, walking right up to their face, saying, "Hi, I'm staying here tonight. I want to have a feast, and these are the people I want you to invite to the feast. Go take care of it. I'm going to take a nap." And I think for a lot of typical gentry characters, that would have been more than enough force in their face to encourage physical violence. But the particular character involved is a scheming, manipulator, seeking benefit, and he had been thoroughly charmed. So this is someone he wants to use. So he's a sycophant in this case. He's going to suck up all of this insult rather than go to an impossible combat which sees him dead or maimed or his plans ruined. He's not going to bring his guards. He's going to hold off. He's going to take it. And he's going to figure out how he can use this new presence or how he can safely remove it without any loss of all the things that he has worked so hard to gain. Now, I think we need to talk about Hadric, and we need to talk about Eloy, and then we'll finish off this enormously long video. Hadric is possibly the most subtly forceful character in our crew because he's actually genuinely friendly. But in context, he's walking up to complete strangers saying, "Hi, my name's Hadric. Can I be your friend?" But he's a wizard. And he's a circle knight. And both of these things are incomprehensible. Wizards are crazy. Wizards are destructive. Wizards are horrifying. The circle is upending everything that anybody ever knew, and the stories about them don't make any sense. And here's one right in front of you. And he's carrying this pack with armor. He's got weapons. He's a wizard, and he's a heretic priest, and he's everything I shouldn't trust. My whole life is telling me I shouldn't trust this person. He's got his hand out and he's saying, "Hey, will you be my friend?" In character, the answer is, what happens if I say no? So much force involved there that on the other side, on the NPC side, the likelihood of this escalating to physical violence, other than a fear reaction of defense, seems highly unlikely. So things do come to a head in Venture 3. We've got Hadric investigating. He wants to know about this artifact. The priest doesn't want to tell him, but he also can't stop him. He doesn't want the information to leave, but he's understanding that the information has already left. And what does this mean? And this friendly guy is just, winning him over and just making statements and is going to cause change in his community. Conflict is boiling there. We didn't really have time to see it. Kai has raised the dead without asking anybody, and has come back and said, "You know what? Things are not right in this area." And through the use of denial of physical space and by treating the man's, even his person, as his own personal property, Kai brings about actual physical violence, which plays out. We have a group. Yeah, we could have raised that group to named characters and probably should have, I think. But at the same time, we're also looking at the clock. So there are some decisions that are being made which are based more on time than anything else. But it turned into a magical duel, really, because of the group. We were using spells to handle the group rather than using swords and knives and clubs to handle individuals in the fight. Is that a missed opportunity, or is that the fact that there are two wizards in the circle and they're both here in the scene, and there's another wizard in the scene? Is that really what's going on? Is it the excitement at using magic drowning out the excitement of using the killing mechanics in the situation? In both situation and what we think of as scene, what that situation means in terms of, story afterward, looking back on it and reflecting on what happened in the sense of pattern and coherence and recognizable story elements. Later, there is conflict with the demon, actual physical conflict from Kai, magic from Hadric. And then we have the simple statement, the bald statement of killing of someone who cannot defend themselves as per the mechanics. So where we really faltered, I think, is in handling named and naming unnamed characters, ascending them to name status. definitely we should have seen more of that by now, and sometimes in physical conflict. However, I think after this ridiculously long explanation, we have seen why there wasn't more fighting. And the last thing I'd like to dispel before I go is that it seems like Eloy's being singled out as the person who is being exposed to new things, who's trying new things, who's learning more about himself. But this is something that he's unlikely to dispel himself. But he's already been out there and played games that have difficult, mature, uncomfortable themes. He's explored these things in his past as a gamer and has learned already what he likes. And he's coming to play this with us simply to enable the play. He enjoys playing with us. And yes, we're playing a game that normally he wouldn't choose to play by himself, but not from having shied away from them before, but from having explored them before and having the sense and maturity to understand what it is that he likes and how he wants to use his playtime. So, how do I end this video? I want to thank you for taking the time, as I mentioned at the beginning, to summarize everything that really facilitates real learning. We've read it, we've discussed it, we've made cheat sheets, we've practiced it, we've made mistakes, we've reflected on the mistakes, we've talked to you about some things, we've talked to other playtesters about some things, and now we've received the summary that we can listen to and compare our experience with and our reflections with so that we can move forward with more confidence. And that's golden. And we really do want to get this beautiful gem of a killing machine into view. We, I guess, are just asking for a little bit more patience. We're sorry about the frustration that we're causing, but this is going to come from the in-character as character perspective, meaning that the fights have to matter. They're not going to be a purely cultural thing. They're not going to be a purely player-based thing of, I really want to try it out, so let's make it happen. They're going to rise out of the situation itself. Could be the next session. Might not be then. We can't say. We'll have to, oh, I'm going to say it. Play to find out. Thanks for listening to all this. Take care.